Today, we are diving into narrative interventions and movement and why the two should go together like peanut butter and jelly. They are better together. The research is clear. If you combine narrative interventions with movement, you're going to get greater gains, not only in movement skills, but also in language and literacy skills. So we got to take that movement and we've got to combine it with narrative skills so we can optimize the gains and also improve the quality of the learning experiences. So first of all, I'm going to review the research. Now, we've already known from the research that children that are kindergarten, first grade, that if they're doing a story retelling, so they read a story and then they retell the story, that if they act it out with their bodies, they're going to get better gains in language and literacy than if they were to retell the story given sequencing cards, or if they're to retell the story by flipping the pages in the book, or if they're retelling the story even with using finger puppets. It's better if they use their whole body and act out the story. So that was with kindergarten, first grade. Today, I came upon research for preschool age. Now, this is from a very elite journal in the field of physical education. I told you in this field, if you want to know better, do better, you need to have wandering eyes. Look outside of the very small field of speech and language pathology. Not that anything's wrong with it that we have, but if you want to do better, know better, have wandering eyes, and look at adjacent areas. So this is from the area of physical education. The second author is a researcher in the area of literacy intervention. The first author is in the area of exercise science. So the two came together like peanut butter and jelly, and they showed us that movement combined with literacy intervention is not only going to produce better gains for 3 to 5-year-old preschoolers than movement alone or literacy alone, storytelling alone. Together, you're going to also get better gains in language skills. And the reason this is so important is because what we want to do is we want to use narratives. Narratives are very powerful. When we look at the meta-analytic research, we find that if you want to get optimal gains in language, when I talk about optimal gains, I'm talking about vocabulary, expression, and comprehension. I'm talking about syntax. I'm talking about knowing the elements of the story. I'm talking about social pragmatic gains. I'm talking about improvements in verbal working memory. If you want to get greater gains across the board in communication, you're going to want to work on narratives. Narratives are what I compare, they're the kettlebell, okay? They're the kettlebell of intervention. So if you ever did kettlebell, you're working every muscle in your body as you swing that kettlebell around. You're working the legs, you're working the arms, you're working the back, you're working the core. That's what narratives are. They are the kettlebell of intervention. So this is something that if a child has a language delay, I feel very comfortable, especially the child has developmental language disorder, taking all of my eggs in my 30 to 40 minutes a week that I have at intervention time, putting them in that narrative basket to optimize gains. So I love narratives. I love movement, but if we put them together, that's when the magic happens. So the research is showing that you get greater gains in language, greater gains in literacy, and greater gains in movement. So let's do it. We're not just doing it because it sounds good, because it's universal design for learning, and that's all we're talking about in the field of education, and it sounds great. It's because I can show you the numbers. I can show you that when they randomly assigned groups to different conditions, the group that had the movement in it outperformed the others at the preschool and school age level. So let's talk about how you're going to do this. It is so simple. First of all, I want you to keep in mind those billion-dollar tier 2 conjunction words that organize your thoughts. So I'm going to use the words first, next, then, lastly, and because. Okay, I'm going to use those billion-dollar words, tier 2 vocabulary that can cross academic subjects, and they can do the heavy lifting in organizing your ideas in a logical, coherent manner, right? So what we're going to do, we're saying narratives, is we're going to think about a very simple task, right? So maybe I love my fire yogurt. I'm spending the big bucks on fire yogurt. That's what I had for dinner tonight. If you know, you know. It is delicious. So that's going to be something I want. I'm going to compare it in the task-oriented movement activity is I want to get, the purpose is I want to have my fire yogurt. You're going to ask the question, how do you? And you're probably like, that's not a story. That's the lamest story out there. The neat thing is the research has been done where they compared a how do you step-by-step procedure, which I'm going to walk you through, versus an imaginary made-up story. And they found no difference in language and literacy outcomes. Even though it might not seem like much, hearing a story about me getting fire yogurt, it gets the job done. It's also less taxing on the child because the child doesn't have to create an imaginary story. That's a harder task to make up a story. So you to talk about what you're doing here and now. I'm going to use the fire yogurt because I just ate, right? So I'm going to say, how do you eat fire yogurt? Now, what I do is I always cue. And the reason I always cue is because I don't want to do the talking. I want to be able to fade my speech model as soon as possible. Because if I'm doing the talking, I'm doing the child's push-ups for them. The child is passively participating. I'm coming with the ideation, what words we're going to use, what order we're going to use it in. I'm using the verbal working memory. I'm putting everything in order. I'm doing the hard stuff, right? I'm even doing the execution. All they need to do is parrot me. So I really want to stop talking as soon as possible. So everything I do, I'm going to pair with gestures. Now, when it comes to those billion-dollar tier 2 words I told you about, I like to use the same cue over and over again. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in my show notes if you want to download the cues I use for first, next, then, lastly, and because, right? So you can share that with parents. So everyone knows these are the cues I use, right? So I'll say first, and then I'll say, I open, and I'll act it out as if you're doing charades on game night. I'm sorry. So you say, I open the door, and I might touch this. Next, I take out the yogurt. I stick it out. Then peel off the top, and put my spoon in. I say, because that's how we eat the yogurt. So I'm telling a whole story. It's a task-oriented movement activity. The goal was to get the yogurt and eat it. I broke it down into a step-by-step process. I use those same powerful conjunctions. I use them over and over again. First, next, then, lastly, because. And I use that over and over again, that nice scaffold, so that will develop automaticity. But I'm acting out everything that I'm doing. And why am I doing that? So I can stop talking. And when I do stop talking and I'm just gesturing and the child's producing the speech, maybe every now and then they don't remember a word, I need to help them with some word retrieval, right? Just pipe it up. What's going to happen then is I get to say, you're the teacher now. I'm not the teacher. There's been a change in the locus of control. It was external, in which I was the teacher. I was doing the talking. Now the child is the teacher. The child's doing the talking and I'm doing the listening. That's how that transfer occurs. If you're painting, how are we going to paint? If you're making crafts, and this is what I do for Father's Day or Mother's Day, where I'm making the friendship bracelets. How do we make a bracelet? And we break it down in this 4-step process. And we say, because that's how we make a bracelet. It might not seem like much, but it gets the job done. So the research indicates that when you're doing that step-by-step how procedure and you're acting it out with your body, there's the peanut butter, there's the jelly, that's the storytelling, that's the movement. You're gonna optimize the outcomes in language and literacy. We have the numbers to show that the outcomes are accelerated. Why are the outcomes accelerated? We could talk about many different reasons why. We could say the child is more actively engaged in the learning process. They're not passively sitting there, they're actively involved. We could say that their dopamine levels are higher because they have a purpose and they're acting it out with their body. We could say that there's extra blood flow to the brain because they're moving their bodies. We don't know why. We don't know what's happening under the hood. We don't have the EEG hooked up to their brain while they're doing this. We just know it's in there. The numbers show movement makes a difference. Move your body when you tell stories. So that's why every week in my SIS membership, I always have 2 movement activities. What are we doing this week? Movement activities, of course. And why is that? Because a moving child is a learning child, not only at preschool age, but also at school age. So have these children moving while they're doing a very complex task of telling a story. So what I tend to do is if I'm getting the yogurt, for instance, or we're making the bracelet, before I give the child the bead to slide on the bracelet because they are telling a story, I will say, how do we make a bracelet? And then we go through the steps. Then I'm acting it out and they're saying the words. In the beginning, we use it like dynamic tactile temporal cueing. The first thing to fade out is your speech. Fade that out first as much as possible. So then I'm fading out the speech, then they're doing the talking, and then later on, I'm not gesturing anymore. I got my hands on my chest and I'm just listening to them. And they're coming up with all the words and all of the ideas and they're producing it themselves. So in the beginning, there's a lot of support, and that support is faded out over time. Now, we know that this method is effective because of research like the Story Champs program that uses a most to least prompting hierarchy using multimodal cues. It's very much like Edith Strand's dynamic tactile temporal cueing, staying at that 80% accuracy level in which you're dynamically cueing. If you need to make the prompts higher because the child's falling below 80% or the child's struggling, you do it. If you need to make the prompts lower because the child is above 80% and this is too easy for them, you pull back on the prompts. And you do that on a moment-to-moment basis. You need more support at this moment. You need less support this moment. It is a back and forth dance. You go up and down the scale. So when we're looking at this in terms of task-oriented movement activities that I do with my students, every week we have 2 movement activities, I have a very simple story. I call it the proto-narrative. And other researchers have referred to the complex sentence as the proto-narrative as well, where you're combining 2-step process. First this and then that. So when I'm working with a child within therapy, if their attention is starting to wane, maybe I don't have them go through the whole story. Maybe if we're making that bracelet, they don't have to go through first, pick a bead, next, pull the bead out of the box, then put the bead on the bracelet. Lastly, slide it on. Maybe they just say, first pick the bead and then slide it on. So I can always change the task, just like I can change my level of prompting on 3 levels. I can make it a simple, complex sentence. First pick the bead, then slide it on. I can make it a 3-clause complex sentence. First pick the bead, then slide it on, because that's how we make a bracelet. I can make it a multiple step, combine 4 different steps complex sentence. First pick the bead, then take it out of the box, next slide it on, because that's how we make a bracelet. So I can alter the task and make it more challenging, make it simpler to keep the child's level of engagement. I don't want the child to be under the table running down the hall before I do something different. When I start to see the eyes glaze over is when I'm going to alter the challenge. So what I like to do when I'm doing a task-oriented movement activity is I have my language already. I have it right here. If you're watching on YouTube, So if the child's a beginning talker, I keep these cards. These are for my SIS membership. These are language cards. I keep them right Velcroed to the soft Velcro on my therapy wall, so I can easily pull them off when I need them, right? They're right in arm's reach, but they're not giving me clutter in my space. I don't like clutter. So I have here the look at sentence blue strip. Very simple for beginner talkers, right? Then I have a complex sentence strip. Then I have a 3-clause complex sentence strip. Then I have 4 sentences combined into a paragraph form. So I don't have to do paragraph, 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 and the child is just like hard, 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 hard. This is too hard. I can go and say, okay, this time we're going to do this. This time we're going to do this. And I can in advance change the task from easy, medium, hard. And I can decide, okay, where are we right now in this activity? Where's the motivation level? Where's the attention level? Where's the frustration level? How do I keep this back and forth interaction, game of ball, going for a longer and longer time? So there's a couple of different ways we can change the demands. We can change it in terms of offering more cueing or less cueing in what we do in the multimodal cueing format. Or we can change it in terms of the task. We can go for a simpler task, a medium, or a more complex task. So there's those 2 dials that you can adjust. And I think what you really want ultimately is to be present and to have an interaction that lasts longer, the back and forth interaction, and at a higher quality, where the child is actively engaged the entire time. The quality matters of the interaction. If the child is all in this interaction, you're going to see better outcomes than if the child is just passively participating. Well, I want you to do what you do best and to roll up your sleeves to make the world a better place, one child at a time. You will always be first. And very important, if you have not completed the AAC survey yet, it's going to be in the show notes. Complete the AAC survey. I think if you work with children with AAC, I actually think you're going to love the survey because it is quite thought-provoking. I have written all the questions in the survey. It is very comprehensive, but I base these questions on interviewing in depth people who are experts in AAC implementation. And I ask them, you as an expert, you with all of your experience, what do you struggle with? And I ask them 60 open-ended questions at hour-and-a-half long interviews with them. We got really deep, and they gave me really deep ideas of what to put into that survey. So I think even when you're reading the survey or you're going through the survey, you're going to think about your back porch, and these questions are going to make you think differently about your AAC practice and think critically about it. I want you to rest assured the survey is completely confidential. There's no way I can tie your email or your name to your responses. Your responses are simply your responses. So please answer honestly. I really need to know what your challenges are so that I can develop materials that meet those challenges. Together, we can make AAC implementation easy. Please make sure to complete that survey. It means a lot. Your responses mean a lot. When we know better, we do better. So go on your way, and I will see you next week.